You're listening to The Abundance Agenda, a podcast about growth and progress. I'm James O'Malley.
And I'm Martin Robbins.
This week, Martin is finally going to lose some weight, and we speak to the chair of the Transport Select Committee. But first, let's look at some official government advice for saving water. So, Martin, we start the show this week with some big breaking news. Did you know that we're currently experiencing a nationally significant incident?
I didn't. Are we running out of ice cream, James, in these hot summer months?
It's even worse than that, Martin. It turns out that the water levels in this country are getting a little bit dicey. 5 areas of Britain are currently officially experiencing a drought, and others are just below the drought threshold. So, according to the government, on average, the first week of August, reservoirs should be 80.5% full across all of England, but according to the most recent figures, they're now currently 67.7% full, so we're running out of water.
Well, that sounds horrendous. How am I going to keep my pond topped up, James?
So there's the usual hosepipe bans that have been put into place, and the government have put out a press release explaining, what the water companies are doing to try and reduce leaks and all the money they've been putting into maintaining water infrastructure and how they're trying to save water that way. But the government has also published some advice on what we, normal citizens, can do as well.
Okay, well, assuming that you and I are in the category of normal people, what can we do? I like a bit of patriotism. How can I help the country?
Okay, Martin, so here's the official advice. So, number 1, install a rain butt. Have you got one in your garden?
I have. I've got a 200-litre butt. It's a big butt. We've had it since we moved into the house. We've got many happy memories of it. It's good for watering the garden. Cannot recommend butts enough. Big butt fan.
I'm glad we're going to clip that for the little clip we put on social media, I think.
I like big butts, James, and I cannot lie.
We got there in the end with the quote we were going for. Anyway, apart from that, Martin, you've got to fix your leaking toilets. You've got to avoid watering your lawn. You've got to turn off the taps when brushing your teeth and shaving.
Don't shave, James, so way ahead of you.
Fantastic. And you've got to take shorter showers.
Oh, no, I've solved that because I have baths instead of showers, so my showers are incredibly short.
I'm sure your CBE from the King is coming for your dedication as we speak, Martin. And then finally, there was one other bit of advice, which is, and prepare yourself for this, you've got to go through now and delete all of your old emails and photos.
Okay, I'm going to be honest, you've lost me a bit there because I'm not entirely sure what that's got to do with water.
Yeah, this was on the official government advice on the press release that DEFRA and the Environment Agency put out. And it came from a named person. It was Helen Wakeham, who's the Environment Agency's Director of Water. And she's the chair of the National Drought Group, which is apparently a thing. And she says that we should, quote, delete old emails and pictures as data centres require vast amounts of water to cool their systems.
And you're saying this is a real organisation and it's not just one of those random Twitter accounts, spoof accounts that you've been paying a bit too much attention to?
Yeah, this surprised me because it just sounds so obviously absurd on the face of it. And basically it is. I think this advice is basically total bullshit.
Yeah, I've got to be honest, I am completely struggling to understand where this comes from. So I get that data centres use water for cooling. It's why sometimes people like to put them under swimming pools or in the ocean where there's lots of water apparently. I'm not an expert on oceans, but I hear that's where most of it is. But I don't really get how deleting emails and accessing, you've got to go and see the email or the photo in order to delete it. So you're basically asking people to go and do stuff in the data center digitally in order to have this impact. So how is that not just using more energy than an image sitting on a hard drive?
Well, this is the thing. When you ask a computer system to do something, it will use a microscopic amount of energy to do that operation, whatever you request of it. And so it just seems, compared to all the other things, all the other advice, and, we can critique those as well. And believe me, I will do in a moment. But this just seems so absurdly minuscule. And this isn't just my sort of subjective take on this. So very helpfully, a guy called Andy Masley, he's actually crunched the numbers on this, or I guess more specifically, he's done basically a big back of the envelope calculation based on some reasonable assumptions.
Good man.
So here's some stats, Martin, on just how much deleting your old emails and photos could save. So Andy says if the average British person who waters their lawn completely stopped, they would save as much water as they would if they deleted 170 million photos or 25 billion emails. Now I know my inbox is pretty bad, but my God.
Yeah, I don't think I've hit the billion yet, James. That's some pretty impressive. Like, I'm sure there's someone, like some email account set up in the civil service that's got 25 billion emails by accident, but not sure many people have.
Exactly. This is making me just think my Substack is actually quite environmentally friendly. And Andy also went on to look at this suggestion and compared it to all those other suggestions a minute ago about like the water butt and so on. So Andy, he said that the toilet waste thing. So apparently the average leaking toilet, I'm not entirely sure where he got these numbers from, but he anchored these all on an empirical basis, even though, big error bars on this. This is sort of a back of the envelope thing. But he said the average toilet wastes about 200 to 400 litres of water every single day. So over the course of a year, that's equivalent in terms of water usage as it would be to store, again, 1.5 billion photos or 228 billion emails. So, just go and fix your damn toilet.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some bad holiday photo presentations in my time, but I don't think anyone's got to the 1.5 billion yet.
And he also says that the average person showers for apparently 8 minutes a day, hopefully a day, and they use 16 gallons of water. And if you cut your shower by 1 minute, you'd save 2 gallons of water. So over the course of a year, that's enough water to save, again, 38.8 million photos or 5.8 billion emails. But I'm going to give you one more comparison on this, Martin, just to point out how absurd this advice is. So he says, if you take a pipette and let a single drop of water drip from it, that drip will contain 0.05 millilitres of water. And that single droplet of water is the water cost of storing 100 emails in a data centre for a full year.
I mean, we're close to figuring out what the cost of 1 gram of emails is here. And like, is it more than gold? Is it less than gold? Is it maybe any enterprising listeners with big calculators might give that one a go.
So needless to say, I think this advice is basically bollocks. And that's even more so when you think about how cloud storage works, because often you can delete stuff from the cloud anyway, and it's not actually deleted. I think all of the major cloud services, they keep your stuff for a little bit in case you change your mind. And deleting stuff, like I say, might take more energy up than if it was just sat there in storage, because you're asking the CPU in the data center to go around and do some processing or do something with the file, which uses more energy. So this is just so microscopically pointless. I just find it strange to see the government suggesting people do something. I don't want to be hyperbolic about this, but I do think this almost amounts to misinformation that's being promoted by the British government, because, this is a named government official saying we should do this when it's just so obviously stupid.
I mean, strange is the right word, right? Because I saw this advice pop up, and it's one of those things where it's not just that it's wrong, but I can't even begin to imagine the sequence of events or conversations or discussions that resulted in that advice being published. Like, it's so completely alien to reality. Like, someone must have found something somewhere and got confused and put it into a report, and somehow it ended up in another report, and then it got tweeted out or whatever. But I would love to know the sequence of events that resulted in that happening, because it's absolutely bewildering to me.
I think it maybe demonstrates how expertise is often compartmentalised, because I'm sure that the National Drought Group know a lot about water, but they clearly don't know much about technology. And I do think it matters, because, you think next time there's a pandemic, the government are putting out advice saying we should do X, Y, and Z to protect against this pandemic, then we want to be able to trust that advice is coming from a place of actual sense and it isn't just nonsense.
Well, yeah, exactly, because we all know that emails can carry viruses, James. So if people don't get proper advice about digital safety, imagine the infections that one of those chain emails about what life used to be like in the 70s could cause among the over 60s, James. It could absolutely wipe out OAPs.
So, Martin, let's go to a bigger point here, because I think this does come back to abundance. And that's why this has annoyed me this week, because I think that this sort of advice to go away and delete your unwanted emails and photos, it's basically hoping that people will change their behaviour for a greater good. You're relying on a sense of sort of personal responsibility, and you're trying to imagine things that people can do in their lives. But a lot of problems simply can't be tackled like this. There is no sort of hoping for the best and hoping people will behave in a sort of altruistic way. And this simply isn't scalable or workable if we actually want to solve problems that Britain has. And I think this actually matters because if you look at something like climate change, a big part of the message, even still on the sort of the green lefts or the Green Party types and that sort of thing, is the idea that we can shame people into behaving differently. If we just say to them, you should choose to live your life differently for this greater good, you should consume less, you should have a more austere, miserable life for this greater good, and you should take this sacrifice, I just don't think it's going to work.
Yeah, it's not exactly a compelling message, and it's also noticeable that the message often comes from quite privileged people on that side of things, the Tarquins of this world, insisting that it's evil that people want to drive cars or brush their teeth or do sort of normal things going about their day-to-day life. And I don't really know how you can sell a political message of actually things should be worse than they were in the past because we're all greedy bastards and everyone should sit in a room and think about what they consume. It's just not going to happen, and it's why generally I would say build more reservoirs before you ask people to smell more.
Yeah, it's always the poshos saying we need to sacrifice more, and I just think this is a really big difference between that sort of view of things and the sort of abundance view of things, because though you'll get a lot of surveys and polls where people will say, yeah, I agree, we should do more to tackle climate change, or yeah, I am willing to sacrifice. I think I heard Ed Miliband on For My Sins, the Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell podcast, sort of making the arguments that people want to change their behaviour and are very supportive of these sort of more austere type climate policies. I just think the sort of revealed preference is going to be people won't do that unless there's a sort of strong incentive to do so.
I think that's the thing. Like, people generally are quite reasonable, and most of the public, if they can see the logic and the sense in doing something, will follow it. I mean, we saw this obviously during World War II. We've seen it more recently during the pandemic when people were relatively happy to wear masks and follow social distancing rules and all of the other painful and difficult things that we had to go through in that period. So people are adults. They generally will help out if they can, and they are generally altruistic. But if you're telling them, oh, you can't brush your teeth anymore twice a day, or you can't water your garden, that's sort of coming down to the category of things where I think they're entitled to say, well, something's gone pretty wrong.
Absolutely. And even, with those examples, it comes back to incentives. I think the reason hosepipe bans do actually make a difference, according to this same government press release, maybe I shouldn't take this at face value given the other things in this press release, but apparently, according to this press release, according to Yorkshire Water, there was a 10% reduction in domestic demand for water following a hosepipe ban there. And they say that saved 80 million litres, which is enough water for 32 Olympic-sized swimming pools. But the reason I think that probably worked is because there was an incentive there, in that there was a hosepipe ban, which is a civil offence. If someone catches you hosing down your lawn, you could get a fine. And there's also a big incentive in that your neighbours will judge you. You don't want to be the one on the block with the beautiful green lawn, whereas everyone else around you looking at you suspiciously, possibly dobbing you in. So there's a huge sort of social incentive there.
Neighbourhood watch with their drone patrol catching you in the garden with your hose in hand.
I live in the suburbs now, so this is very much my neighbourhood. Everyone's got a Ring doorbell. Anytime there's anyone slightly suspicious in the neighbourhoods, someone's straight onto Facebook going, who is this? What are they doing? What is this suspicious person doing?
Why are they carrying a hose pipe?
Exactly. The neighbourhood watch are vicious around here. So I'm sure that's a part of it. And during the pandemic, it was the same. I think there was a surprising amount of rule following there.
James, the British people love a good rule. We are, I think, quite an authoritarian society at times.
But what enforced that rule was, again, both the legal and the social penalties. I once saw, during the early days of the pandemic, a police officer telling someone off for sitting on a bench. And I thought, what have we become as a country? And don't get me wrong, I was following the rules because I understood the problem with the virus. But even then, I could see that was a bit absurd. But also then you had the big shaming thing. It was definitely a very big thing to shame people for breaking the rules. So people, had to resign from jobs and things because of it at the time. So I just don't see how this scales to things like saving water whilst brushing your teeth or taking a shower, because hopefully your neighbours aren't there watching you shower with a stopwatch, because that would be weird. So I just don't think asking nicely is the answer. And yeah, if we actually want to save water, if we actually want to not have droughts and water problems, we need to build some stuff.
Absolutely. And we talked about building stuff in our episode on June the 2nd, I think, when we talked about the 2 new reservoirs that are being built, which are the first in 30 or so years. But James, speaking of spying on your neighbours, we've heard reports that there are still some people who have yet to subscribe to this podcast, either on Substack at abundancepod.com or on Apple or Spotify. And I think it's fair to say that we're bitterly disappointed by it. The rules are there for a reason, James. And if people aren't going to follow them, it may as well be anarchy. So if you're still not subscribed or following us, please do make sure that you click that button or tap it with your finger or whatever your personal device supports. And do please share the episode as well if you're on some kind of social media. There's a lot of terrible stuff on social media, so why not balance it out with something a little bit more intelligent and thoughtful on occasion? And is there anything else we'd like people to do, James?
No, just share the show, otherwise you'll bring shame to your family.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfectly reasonable message. So, James, I think it's fair to say that once you strip away our fig leaf of ideology, the real driving force of this podcast is our own personal grievances. Whether it's the road near me that can't be fixed, the road near you that can't be fixed, or your frankly extremely ill-advised purchase of an electric scooter.
I mean, Martin, what's the point in a podcast unless you can't use it to litigate your personal grievances? And that's why, incidentally, next week we're going to do a very special episode about how my entire Year 8 French class was put into class detention, even though I was being very well behaved. I was the little spot in the class. Of course I was being well behaved, yet I was being unfairly punished along with everyone else.
I think we're heading into staycation territory here, James, although I do agree with you. I think it's one of the worst things about school was the obsession with collective punishment. But anyway, today I've got a new grievance to share because 2 weeks ago I decided to take the plunge and enter the brave new world of semaglutides. And now every Monday morning I stab myself in the belly with a Mounjaro pen, or a Monty J, as we've started calling it in our household. And so far it's been great, in all honesty.
So this is obviously the miracle weight loss cure that everyone's using now. So what's it actually like? Do you feel full all the time or what?
Yeah, incredibly, it's named after Mount Kilimanjaro, apparently, which I didn't realize, but kind of makes sense. But yeah, it's genuinely hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. And it's kind of like it almost severs the relationship between the voices that come from different parts of your body and the stuff that's going on in your brain. And I know that sounds a little bit weird, but it's almost like firstly, it's turned off the voice in my head that fancies a biscuit at 11 a.m. because, it's 2 or 3 hours since breakfast and lunch is still a couple of hours away. And before, if I ate a big meal, at some point, I would feel uncomfortable. I've eaten a lot of food and now my stomach is like physically full and I probably need to stop eating now. But now it's like I can be partway through a meal and it's almost as if a switch has just been flipped in my brain that says, okay, I've had enough now. I don't want to put any more food into my mouth and that's absolutely fine. Like I don't feel full or uncomfortable, but it's really uncanny. Like just a switch has kind of flipped. And it's had a similar effect with drinking and alcohol, which, if I'm honest, has been a fairly major source of calories in my life as a big Scotch and wine fan. But it's weird. It's like you've suddenly got a different personality around food. Like I wasn't prepared for how much it almost rewires part of your brain. But then I still enjoy the food and I still enjoy a glass of wine. It's just like, okay, now I know I've had enough and I can eat less and lose some weight.
I genuinely can't even imagine having that level of restraint, Martin. But I must admit, Martin, I am very jealous. I too have tried to get on something like this, but apparently I went to the doctor. I've got some other medical thing that I'm not going to go into, but they said, no, I'm not allowed this. So there I am watching all my friends. Literally, I think like 80% of my friends must be on this at this moment, and everyone's there losing weight. And here I am, a big fatty, an actual fatty. I'm much larger than everyone else, and yet I can't get this miracle cure.
Well, we are fans of abundance on this podcast, James. So, don't lose all hope.
You can have an abundance of me for a while yet. So, Martin, you said there was a grievance here, though. So, you're losing weight. That sounds good. What's wrong with that?
Well, so some of our listeners may have noticed that there's a new president in the United States this year. It may have slipped past a lot of people's attention. I can't honestly remember his name, and generally I try not to pay too much attention to American stuff. It just seems like a lot of fuss and drama, and I think there must be, 3 or 4 million American podcasts now about the news there, and most families seem to run 1 or 2 YouTube channels from what I can make out. So there's not much point British people covering America or really, frankly, paying much attention to it at all most of the time. But it turns out every so often they do something that kind of leaks out and affects the rest of the world, which I guess as a British person, I can't massively complain about because we have invaded literally every country that you can name at some point. But crucially, James, this time it's affecting me personally, which is that they are screwing with my supply of Mount Jaro.
Martin, that's the absolute worst. So I guess this is the massive price increase that was announced last week where I think, again, about a surprising number of all my middle-class friends are really upset about it. It's like the biggest problem they've faced in their lives, I think, since British Airways increased the number of points you need to get gold status. So what actually happened there?
I love the fact that you're admitting to having middle-class friends now, James. We're gradually getting you to realize where you actually are in life. But no, so basically drugs are very, very expensive in America, but they're often a lot cheaper in the rest of the world. And that's even true for drugs that are made by American manufacturers. So Mounjaro is made by a company called Eli Lilly, who are an American pharmaceutical company. And yet, even though it's made by Americans, it's still 2 or 3 or 4 times more expensive there than in the UK. And in fairness, that's a pretty huge injustice, right?
So the solution, I guess, is to make it cheaper in the US, right? Right?
I'm afraid not, Natalie Portman. No, it turns out the solution is to make it far more expensive here, so then everybody is equally miserable. But for all the uproar about the orange tyrant making people fat again, if you are being generous, and, James, we are nothing but always generous on this podcast, Trump kind of, sort of, vaguely has a point because Mounjaro was first sold into the UK at a very steep discount, which I think pretty much nobody else in the world has. Anywhere in Europe, Ireland, the US, North America. I think Canada is the only other country where it's bizarrely cheap, but generally everyone is paying the full price apart from us. And so it's not like we're being randomly price gouged. We're basically being asked to pay our fair share. But obviously that's still a very eye-watering thing for people that are used to it at the current price. And it's not much comfort if you're relying on it like I am as of 2 weeks ago, which it turns out, James, was epic timing.
So, Martin, what's the damage? How much more expensive are we talking about? How much is this hitting you in the pockets on the slightly smaller trousers?
Actually, I'm wearing shorts at the moment, James, because it's summertime, but we'll be back in the trousers in the autumn. People will be happy to know. But each pen gives you 4 doses, which last a dose per week, so 4 weeks. And it costs at the moment in the range of about £150, depending on the size of the dose. After the price hike, that could rise to 300, 350, maybe even more. We don't know exactly how much because pharmacies in the UK will try and negotiate some kind of discount, but it's going to be a massive increase.
So that sounds pretty unaffordable for most people because, 150 quid a month, that's a lot of money for a lot of people. And then if you go to £300, you could buy a car with that.
Yeah, exactly. And listen, I am very lucky. I can afford to keep taking it. And if it costs, say, several £1,000s to get down to a good weight, ultimately, I still think that's an incredibly good investment in my health. It's the sort of money that you'd pay to go to the gym for a couple of years and probably have less good results at the end of it for various reasons. And obviously, you and I get, $500,000 each from Tony Blair and the Clintons and George Soros to spread our pro-growth propaganda on the podcast.
Oh, George only gives you $500,000. I get $1 million.
In fairness, James, you do all the editing, so that kind of tracks for me. But either way, I'm extremely lucky that I can afford it, but hundreds of thousands of people won't be able to. They're going to have to switch to Wegovy, which is still great, but not quite as good. Or many of them will just come off and bluntly probably get fat again.
So, Martin, if I recall correctly, we've got a National Health Service, which pays for a lot of this stuff. Can't a lot of people just go and get prescriptions if they go there as a big fatty?
So it's sort of like dentists in the sense that there's quite a limited supply via the NHS, and so it's really rationed to the most obese people. They have negotiated, incidentally, with Eli Lilly on a deal with Mounjaro, so they can keep the cost of that low as well. but the number of people who can get it on the NHS is quite limited. And also the process of getting prescribed is, I think, a lot more daunting for people. So with an online pharmacy, you can effectively fill out a form, press submit, answer some questions, take some quite embarrassing photographs, if I'm honest, basically to show precisely how fat you are in gruesome detail, which are now on my phone and in someone's email inbox, which is not great.
Maybe you should go through and delete your old photos, Martin.
Yeah, it turns out there's other reasons other than saving water. So it's not a fantastic process, but it's a lot nicer than having to go to your GP and kind of sit in a chair and talk about how fat you are and have them look you up and down. And I think there's also still a little bit of a culture there where lots of GPs now are absolutely brilliant about stuff like this, but you still have the more old-fashioned people perhaps that go back to that mentality that we've talked about before, where it's almost like if you're not dieting and exercising and losing weight the proper way, somehow you're cheating. But the reality is it's very hard to lose weight if you're overweight and stressed and leading a demanding life. I've lost large amounts of weight before, but it's difficult to keep off once you're there, and it requires a real ongoing commitment for a year or 2 years at a time. And if our goal is to just get people healthy, then honestly, just bring on the jabs.
See, this is what scares me, Martin, because in my head, I picture you as quite a thin person already. So it's like I'm thinking, how thin are humans supposed to be if you're on this? But anyway, so Martin, hundreds of thousands of people then are going to probably not be able to continue getting the jabs if the price hike goes in. So surely this is going to have a really insane impact on people's health.
Exactly. So let's just kind of set out the stakes here. So if we're talking about the things that Mounjaro in particular and semaglutides generally have an impact on, cardiovascular disease. If I mention that, you're probably thinking heart attacks, but we're also talking strokes and vascular dementia there as well, which is a big chunk of all dementia cases, all of which Mounjaro has a big impact on. Then there's diabetes. There's also the follow-on impact on things like cancer occurrence and treatment and reoccurrence. Each of these areas that I'm talking about in a fairly flippant way are like a 10 or 20 billion pound a year cost to the NHS in direct care alone, so hospital appointments, GP visits, consultations, tests, emergency visits to A&E, prescriptions, medical devices, all that kind of stuff adds up. And that's before you even get to the cost to the economy from early deaths, lost productivity, and obviously the kind of moral and social aspects of lots of people dying young.
So it feels like a no-brainer then. So shouldn't the government be looking at how to make this drug cheaper and more available to everyone?
Yeah, exactly. And this is where, honestly, if I look back over the last 2 years, I feel like there's been a massive lack of imagination from the government, because let's run some numbers, right? Let's say there are 10 million overweight people in the UK, which is, I think, probably even an underestimate, who could benefit from the drug. So you could basically end most obesity in the UK in a year by just reaching those people. And if you gave them, say, £100 per month each as a voucher to put towards weight loss drugs, whether it's Wegovy or Mounjaro, the cost of that would be £1 billion a month, which is basically a rounding error against the national budget. It's tiny. And okay, Mounjaro would still be more expensive, but Wegovy would cost like £20 or £30 a dose at that point. Basically, anyone who wanted it could take it. It would be amazing.
Martin, this sounds like you've just invented something amazing. This sounds like the best investment in public spending, I don't know, maybe ever?
Exactly. And you would see the benefits almost immediately, both in terms of people's health and how they feel and their ability to work and be productive and enjoy their lives, but also in political terms. Imagine the benefits to the government in polling if millions of people in the next year suddenly feel lots better about their health and they're being supported by the government to achieve that. I think that would be a massive vote winner if you pitched it the right way. There's just one teeny tiny problem.
Here we go. So what's the problem, Martin?
So it's a good thing. It's that it might actually not be necessary. So at the moment, as I say, Wegovy, Mounjaro are like £150 a dose, which is roughly a month of treatment. Mounjaro is going to increase in price in the short term, but ultimately, the era of expensive semaglutides is coming to an end fairly soon. Natasha Loder, who is a fantastic journalist, way back when I used to be a judge for the Association of British Science Writer Awards, I used to vote for her pieces on a regular basis, a lot of the stuff that she wrote at The Economist. But she has a piece on the Overmatter Substack, which is written jointly with Peter Singer. And they point out that by the end of this year, the patents for semaglutide will have expired in India, China, Brazil, and randomly Canada.
I was going to say, you were listing developing countries there and then Canada.
Yeah, I'm not sure quite what Canada did to get that deal, but well done.
So I guess those countries can just start mass producing this on the cheap then.
Yeah, exactly. So firms in China and India have been building up massive capacity to basically flood the market with generic versions of the drugs. The downside for us, unfortunately, is that in the UK, the patent doesn't expire until 2031, which is quite annoying and means that even if these are being manufactured cheaply everywhere else in the world, it will still be illegal to sell here for another 5 years or so.
5 years doesn't sound even that long, Martin. So surely the government could just subsidise the cost of Mounjaro and Wegovy and so on until the patent expires. And then in 2031, everyone's getting thin already and it's cheap and we don't need to subsidise it anymore and everyone wins.
Yeah, exactly. I do think it's one of those things where the sooner we bite the bullet and get people onto these kinds of treatments, the better, and the faster we're going to see the benefits and the faster we'll see the economic benefits. But I think we're also about to see a really, really weird few years, because essentially the situation that we're going to end up with is if you want to take Wegovy or Mounjaro, you can either pay 150, 200, 300, 400 pounds a month for it in the UK, or you could get a cheap flight to Hong Kong for a few £100, pick up your annual supply of drugs and bring it back to the UK because it's cheaper than buying it over here, and you're still saving money even with the price of a plane ticket. We could see huge numbers of additional British people going over to Toronto to pick up cheap Canadian weight loss jabs because it's just going to be so much cheaper than getting it here. It's going to be like the booze cruises on the P&O ferry that we used to do back in the 90s.
Will they need to bring it into the country stuffed up their arse, like cocaine or something, or will they just be able to bring it in a suitcase?
I don't know. I think it's going to be quite surreal. What I'm imagining is that there are just going to be armies of like spherical British people waddling around Toronto airport or Hong Kong airport, like begging foreigners for cheap semaglutides. It's really quite a compelling vision for our future, James.
So Martin, before we get on with the guest this week, let's do a quick bit of housekeeping. If you're enjoying the Abundance Agenda, please do share the show and tell people about it. We're really enjoying making the show. The more people who listen, the more it feeds our enormous, ravenous egos. So go now to your podcasting app, get the link to the pod, text it to a friend, send them a WhatsApp, say, hey, you like nerdy shit like this, and then post on your social media as well. And give us a good review on Apple Podcast as well, because again, we got a very nice review this week of our discussion about AI last week. Someone really enjoyed that. So yeah, just support the show. That's basically the message I'm trying to convey.
Yeah, but make sure you click that subscribe button now before the hosepipe ban comes in, because, you know, that can use a lot of water, James.
So Martin, in addition to doing this podcast, we also write our own Substack newsletters. What have you been writing about this week?
So I've been writing about AI again, and in particular this kind of weird AI aesthetic that's risen among aspects of the new right, or the far right as they used to be called. It's a bit of an interesting piece. It's quite a disturbing piece in places. There are some strange people out there, but that was last week. Next week I've got nothing coming up because I'm lazy and I'm away this weekend. So, you know, tell me what I should write about. What about you, James?
Well, Martin, I've been continuing our AI beef. So everyone who listened last week to our debate will know I'm slightly more optimistic about AI than you are. So I also wrote about AI with GPT-5 having come out. And I wrote about why I still think that AI could conceivably eat the world. So there's that. And also I'm going to plug a second thing, because I published 2 things this week. I've had a busy week.
Christ.
So you might remember I wrote about Sunday trading and the madness of the Sunday trading laws a couple of weeks ago. Well, off the back of that, the piece I wrote was read by Labour Together, the influential think tank, and they actually commissioned a poll off the back of my piece asking what the British public think about the idea of devolving the Sunday trading laws down to local authorities. It was sort of mad. I just wrote this thing on the internet about how I was angry that I couldn't buy a loaf of bread on a Sunday at 5 p.m. And now apparently someone's done a poll to ask what people think about it. So I've got the full results of that poll on my Substack. So yeah, go and have a look at that and see why I am technically speaking here for the silent majority.
Yep. Once again, the podcast becomes a platform to air our personal grievances.
Okay, Martin, so now let's get on with this week's guest, and it's a big get this week. We've got Ruth Cadbury, who is the Labour MP for Brentford and Isleworth, but equally importantly, she's the chair of the Transport Select Committee and has been holding government's feet to the fire on various transport issues. So we thought we'd have a chat with her to take her temperature on a whole number of transport things and learn more about the committee's recent inquiry launch, where they're going to be looking into joined-up journeys and how they can make it so things are better integrated, which I think is a slam dunk for the audience of this podcast. So yeah, here's the chat I had a couple of weeks ago with Ruth Cadbury. So I'm delighted to be joined now by Ruth Cadbury, for the Labour MP for Brentford and Isleworth and the chair of the Transport Select Committee. I want to start with the integrated journey inquiry that the Transport Select Committee is recently opened up. So I was just wondering, what are you hoping to find out, and what is the value of taking a look at integrated transport?
Well, I suppose starting from the point of view that, and this is my view, is transport is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So how people and stuff needs to get around and can get around. Are there ways of being able to do that more efficiently, more reliably, more cost effectively, for public transport in particular being more accessible? Is the information easy to find? And basic stuff like timetables, do they join up? Is it easy to transfer from one mode of transport to another? In the context of net zero and congestion and urban air pollution, what are the positive ways that we can provide alternatives to private car journeys? So they're sort of fairly fundamental things, but the timing of our inquiry, we hope, links into the work that the government is doing. So when Louise Hay was Transport Secretary, she announced the Integrated National Transport Strategy for England that the Department for Transport was going to be working on. So we wanted to feed into that, and hence the timing for our inquiry.
I think this is a really great idea. I mean, this is perfect for me. In my circumstances, I lived about 20 minutes from my local station, so every journey for me starts with getting in a car, but usually I park up at the station and then travel into London that way, because you'd have to be crazy to drive into central London. But Google Maps doesn't seem to understand this is a thing people might want to do, which is very infuriating. So do you get a sense of what the sort of key frictions are with the way things are at the moment, and are the sort of the problems we need to solve in terms of helping things join up and making things work better together?
Well, I think part of the answer to that question depends on what people tell us and the evidence we receive. I mean, my sense is that as a nation, we're not that good at taking transport and having a single, or a single set of objectives for transport. I mean, for instance, for our recent buses connecting communities inquiry, we went to Ireland. And in Ireland, okay, very much smaller country, in a very different economic position, but they have a single national transport organisation. I guess, strategic transport organisation. And I guess in Wales and Scotland, there is equivalent as well. And for England, we don't have that. And so we've got this organic growth of everything from, well, the somewhat chaotic privatised rail infrastructure that we've had up till now. We have a sort of cultural history around the car, and until only relatively recently, thinking about car travel, it was predict and provide. We've had different setups in different local authority type areas. So London was the one part of England that never privatised the buses. You've got different types of transport authorities and different overlaps with different responsibilities with the various local authorities. So it's been quite messy.
Is there a tension, do you think, with the government's devolution agenda? Because there's a big push at the moment to give more powers to local government or regional authorities and take more of a strategic approach on a regional level. But when you've got something like, say, GB Railways taking control of everything, that seems like quite a good way of coordinating trains on a national level. But ultimately, say in Greater Manchester, should it be Andy Burnham in charge of the trains there, or should it be GB Railways in the not too distant future?
Well, in Greater London, we have a London fare structure. We've got the zones, and on tube and train, you know what you're going to be paying, and you pay a lot less on the bus fare. So it's not really rocket science. I think the devolution agenda is really, really important, and it enables the strategic thinking around transport to very much link in with the strategic thinking around the economy. That's that regional economy, the jobs needs, public services, and also connect different forms of transport together. So I think that is the overwhelming benefit. And sure, there'll be tensions possibly around the edges. One tension that we've identified, or I've identified, is rail path capacity in some areas where there's a lot of demand for limited amount of track space. So does national freight get priority over commuter trains, or the other way around? And but those are the kind of issues that, you've got a strategic local authority area and mayoral authority, or whatever, and Great British Rail, and they'll have to sit down and work out a solution.
One of the questions I saw that you're going to be investigating, and you particularly raised it in the press release for the new inquiry, is around the sort of Treasury Green Book and how it values the value for money of integrating transport. So I think intuitively, it certainly seems like a no-brainer to me that the better we can make transport work together and the more we can reduce friction in terms of train arrives and then there's a bus waiting for you and stuff like that, that seems like obviously a good thing. But is there a sort of a metric or a way that you think the Treasury can be persuaded to pay to help things like that happen? Because presumably someone's there looking at a spreadsheet and it's hard to sort of work out just from looking at the numbers and seeing the value and seeing how that works.
Well, I couldn't sit here and work out a different metric, but I do know that for a long time people have been frustrated by the current Green Book, web tag, whatever, which seems to prioritise the working downtime of a businessman, usually driving in his car and making that as short as possible. Whereas all that does is, I'm old enough to remember the building of the M25 and then the expansion of it and then the expansion of it. And, it just reminds me of something that I was once told about. Again, sorry, this is a rather an old person's analogy, but when there were pigeons and people selling pigeon seed in Trafalgar Square, it was this analogy: if you throw seed out to the pigeons, and there's always more pigeons than there is seed, and that's what you get where there's unlimited demand for constrained space. So that way of appraising transport, and the way we travel, how the fact that you can work or sleep or watch a film while you're in a train and even a bus now, in a coach, then that's productive time, and increasing numbers of people who, when they're traveling for work, choose the train over the car, even if it might take longer, although nowadays in the UK it often doesn't because of congestion. But also we need to look at things more widely, and value for money also means economic growth, the wider benefits, decarbonisation, which, we've only had our net zero targets for 10 or so years. We need to look at regional inequalities. I'm very conscious that I'm a West London MP, the second highest growth area by GVA in the UK after Central London. So it definitely needs to change. And I was on the Transport Committee a few years ago when we started to look at that. And I'm glad that the recent announcements by government have talked about, particularly in the context of regional inequalities, have looked at amending the Green Book. But it's tinkering around the edges compared with a much bigger look at it that has to happen.
So talking of paying for stuff, and to broaden things out more widely, I know recently you had Mark Wilde, the CEO of HS2, hauled in front of your committee for questioning to find out what's been going on there. Obviously, it's been a bit of a mess. It's a hugely controversial scheme. On our podcast, we're very supportive. We want HS2 to be finished so we can take the train to Birmingham and hopefully beyond. But in terms of when he was at your committee, what do you think is the most important things that we've learned about what went wrong with HS2 and what we need to learn for the future?
Well, first of all, Mark Wilde wasn't dragged kicking and screaming to our committee. He is the new chief exec who was specifically appointed to get to the bottom of the cost overruns and to rescue the situation and get it back on track cost-wise. So, and he's been more than happy to come. And I'm hoping that I'll meet the new chair of HS2 as well before too long. So, and he's been very willing and open because, he wasn't involved in the past, and he has a record of success in turning around the outcome of what was Crossrail and became the Elizabeth line. So, I mean, he's been very, very clear that the mistakes have been made from the outset. What was the purpose of HS2? And to say a lot of people are opposed to it, I don't think many people are. Put it another way, strong support for a high-speed rail line going up from London to the north of England and beyond, because the West Coast Main Line literally is full, and we need additional new rail capacity up, particularly the west side of England. And I think there's very little dispute about that. But it was a great idea, but it wasn't clearly identified whether speed or capacity were the primary objectives. Nobody seems to know whose idea it was to be the fastest high-speed rail line in the world. Where did that come from? But given the UK is not that big, so yes, you can get more capacity if you have faster trains, but the time between London and Birmingham, it's such a short distance, so it only gets up to full speed for a few miles anyway. So it doesn't need to be much faster. It might as well be the same speed as the TGV or the Shinkansen in Japan, rather than, I think, 220 mph. And that means very, very high specification, because the tolerances on the rail have to be so tight to deal with those speeds safely. But also, if it wasn't so fast, it wouldn't need to be so straight. If a few more bends might have avoided the Batts Wood, might have avoided some of the most expensive bits of tunnelling and viaducts, and avoid, as I say, sensitive areas. And that wasn't resolved at the beginning. Also, we have this bizarre hybrid bill committee system, which adds time, costs, and potentially further amendments. And then you got a lot of political pushback from MPs along the route who weren't going to directly benefit through stations in their areas. And I think that's where a fair bit of cut and cover was replaced by very expensive tunnelling. So, not developing it before. And Mark Miles said, we really should have gone for think slow, act fast, which is how high-speed rail is developed in countries like Spain and France. All of the detail, absolutely written out in detail, consulted on, agreed. Everybody knows what the project is before the first spade goes in the ground. And to retain that despite elections, political changes and so on. And that was perhaps the biggest mistake. And we can't undo that. There's some elements of commercial contracting where risk is based between the contractors and the government, and he's addressing that, governance and accountability and so on. So hopefully Mark Wilde is able to get a grip on the costs, and that the Euston to Handsacre and Curzon Street will be able to be continued and completed on new time and new budget, but let's fix it and go ahead. And we should know that by the middle of next year. And we will, the Transport Committee will keep asking him back and asking him how it's going.
As a train nerd, I feel very conflicted about. I completely buy the rational case for making the train go a bit slower and everything else. But as a train nerd, I'm thinking it would be cooler, wouldn't it, to go really fast?
You'll have to go to Japan.
So can I put to you a bit of a conspiracy theory? I've been talking about this on the podcast in previous weeks. So this is me just wildly speculating now. So forgive me on this. So at the moment, HS2 is going to end just north of Birmingham because of the Manchester leg getting chopped off. But in the spending review in June, Rachel Reeves announced support in just one line for Northern Powerhouse Rail. So this is a scheme, as I understand it, is a broader scheme for the North, but a key part of delivering what was was understood to be Northern Powerhouse Rail, was building a connection from basically Manchester Airport into central Manchester. And my understanding is originally this was going to share tracks with HS2. So when you dig a tunnel up near Manchester, Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2 would share some tracks. But that bit of HS2's been chopped off. But if Northern Powerhouse Rail is now officially being supported by the government, maybe you can see where I'm going here. If we're going to build Northern Powerhouse Rail and we're going to get HS2 to Birmingham anyway, in terms of HS2, does that not just leave that one little bit in between the sort of the easy bit between Birmingham and Manchester, or just out of Manchester left? So am I crazy for speculating? Could we see the Manchester leg of HS2 sort of secretly revived, do you think?
Well, I've pushed government on several occasions in parliamentary questions on what's going to happen to the rest of what was HS2 phase 2, and particularly that phase from Handsacre to Manchester. And I've not been pushed back. At one point, Darren Jones said to me, "You'll have to wait till next week," which is a spending review, and next week came and went with nothing more specific. So I'm just going to keep pushing on the issue. And I know that the local authorities, particularly that the Merseyside and Manchester mayors and many others, will keep pushing. And there's absolutely no doubt that we need a high-speed line to go, at the very least, to a Manchester-Liverpool area, link up with the Transpennine route. And, I hope in the long run on to Scotland. We shouldn't be so dependent on flying if we want to go to Edinburgh and Scotland quickly. And that's from a London perspective, and for many others, it's not convenient, and it could be. So yeah, in principle, in theory, so far as I'm concerned, we have to be ambitious. I understand why the government is not prepared to fly kites, fly flags, what's the word? Anyway, for schemes for which there isn't current funding for. And they don't want to fall into the mistake that the previous government did by announcing stuff for which there was no funding. So I understand their cautiousness. But yeah, the fact that every time I ask the question, I'm not given an absolute negative is hopeful.
Fantastic. I'm going to add your comments to my chalkboard with red string and newspaper cuttings on as I place together this conspiracy theory. So I'm very conscious of time, but I've got a couple more questions for you, if that's all right, because I really want to talk to you about cars as well. I guess, first of all, I'd just be very curious to get your take, as the chair of the Transport Select Committee, of what's your view on autonomous cars, self-driving cars, because it seems that they're sort of imminent now. There's real taxi services in use in America with Waymo and stuff. We've got Wave here as a big British company who are now worth, I think, £1 billion or $1 billion. And it seems like, could we be in, do you remember in sort of 2021, AI was talked about, but it wasn't until ChatGPT launched that everyone thought, oh, hang on, AI is this big deal. Could we be in a similar situation now with autonomous vehicles where we're just waiting for, all of a sudden autonomous vehicles are going to be a thing, a commonplace thing, and they're going to change how everyone gets around and how transport fundamentally works? And should we be thinking with a mindset of this is a thing that could happen? Or is that just crazy talk?
I don't know. Is it like nuclear fission?
It's always 20 years away, nuclear fusion. Yeah.
And I'm quite old, so people said nuclear fission was 20 years away, 45 years ago. So I've been in an autonomous car in Camden with Wave, and sitting in the passenger seat, and it was a strange experience. But all the time, there was a very, very experienced driving examiner instructor guy, very, very experienced guy, and he was concentrating every single minute, every single split second, with his hands just an inch from the steering wheel and his foot inches from the pedals as we drove through parts of Camden and Islington. And I thought, well, this feels a long way off being driverless. On the other hand, my former colleague on the committee, former MP Ben Bradshaw, sent me a video of him on holiday in San Francisco, I think, and their ride in a driverless taxi, a normal car but no driver, and they were sitting in the back. I think the difference between California and our roads, particularly our roads in the centre of our older cities, is that they're just not maintained to a standard. The road layouts are uneven. They've evolved very organically and with multiple uses over the decades since they were first created, and multiple users at the moment. And I just think the reality for public roads across all of the UK is a long way off. I think there may be specialist uses. There's certainly possibilities in closed environments like, I don't know, airports or leisure parks and that sort of thing. But I think we're further away. Goods vehicles, HGVs in tandem, maybe that's a possibility as well on motorways and more or less dedicated routes, but probably not, as I say, driving down the high street.
So you don't think we need to be preparing more, or the government should be
Well, the
doing
government,
more
to
in
be fair,
terms
the
of...
government is
Yeah, yeah.
preparing, and they either have consulted or have launched the consultation or about to consult on the legal side, and they've got to get that in place. Where does the responsibility and the liability lie? Those sort of issues, and we'll be seeing the draft statutory instruments, the regulations for them. And I've been to a briefing on those, so that's going to happen. But I'm still not sure that means that we're going to be getting into the back of a completely driverless cab in our town centres very soon.
Okay, but that's fair enough. So, very finally, because I want to let you get back to your day, I'm just going to pick another transport topic from the buffet. And this is just something a personal bee in my bonnet, basically, which is e-scooters. So, there was a story in I think it was the Daily Mail last week, which basically said, and it was framed as the government are planning a crackdown on e-scooters. And this amused me because I know this is basically a plan to legalise e-scooters, which are currently illegal. And there's been plans for several years now. The reason I care about this is because, A, I think they're fun, but also I bought one in 2020 assuming they were about to be legalised, and it's been sat in my garage ever since because I'm the one person in Britain who's not just riding it illegally. And so I'm obsessed with whether this will finally be legalised. Do you think we could finally be legalising e-scooters soon? Is this have you heard anything about this?
Well, I'm just trying to. I heard your last podcast, and I laughed at your purchase of an e-scooter. I mean, if you know anybody with a country estate with nice smooth paths, and you have their permission, you've got every right to ride it there. But did I see the government were talking about extending the consultation and allowing more cities to take on the hire schemes for e-scooters and e-bikes? And I wondered if that was perhaps further kicking down the road of the consultation. It's a tricky one because I know they're looking at how it's working in other countries, and it's mainly a city thing anyway, e-scooters. I think there's more work to be done. I hope the DfT are doing it. For instance, round our way and out to London Borough, there was an arrangement between the council and Lime Bikes, and no other hire bike provider wanted to be involved. And it's been mixed. I use Lime Bikes sometimes, and they're obviously popular among users and subscribers, but they're deeply unpopular because the way they're left lying around on the pavement. And yet other providers in other parts of London, and I'm thinking particularly of Forest Bikes and Voir, don't seem to have the same problem. There seems to be an issue with the providers, which is putting people who don't use e-scooters and e-bikes, they're very anti them because of the way they're used and misused. Now, if there is a way that some hire providers manage to provide them without cluttering up the pavements and do it in a way that's better than Lime, then I'm all for extending the hire providers. They're also they need to be funded somehow, and a lot of the money is in the data that they sell from users. Sorry, I know I'm going off slightly off topic because it's a very big crossover, particularly in the minds of people who are opposed to all of this, in the hire schemes and the private e-scooters, which, as I say, currently, as you know, are not legal on our roads. It can be quite dangerous as a rider. I was terrified the first 2 or 3 times I used a an e-scooter when I'm not terrified riding a pedal bike or an e-bike. I don't know why. You feel a bit more vulnerable. Maybe the wheels being so small and we have so many potholes on our road. But yeah, maybe it's about separating out the two issues with looking at the legalization of e-scooters, which might, I think, as your podcast said the other week, you might maybe creating a specific class of vehicle, because that's one problem. They don't currently sit in any class and can't be made to either, unlike fake e-bikes.
Yeah, it's some sort of weird legal loophole. So I'm hoping they'll solve it, because I could theoretically just take mine out and break the law and hope for the best. But I just know even if I did it, I would get 50 Ring doorbell videos posted on my local Facebook group with people saying, "Who's this fat balding man who's almost 40 riding an e-scooter like a little hoodlum?" So alas.
But what's interesting, I don't see them being used as much, and the people who I do see using them are people like you look like people commuting, and they often have helmets, packs, and they seem to be sensible people using them for sensible reasons. Whereas I think originally there were a lot of kids using them, for some of whom would be using them for nefarious activities. So, and maybe those people, those particularly the exploited gig economy workers, they've now shifted on to the very powerful fake e-bikes with the dodgy batteries.
Cool. That's something we'll have to keep talking about on the show, I think. But for now, I'm going to let you go, Ruth, because you've been very kind with your time. I'm going to go now and put my scooter onto eBay, and I'm going to let you get back to your day. But for now, Ruth Cadbury, thank you very much. So, Martin, that's just about it for this week's show. How do you think it went?
It's been great, James. I'm just off to make sure that the water butt's full, because I'm going to need to use my computer a lot for the rest of this month, and I don't want to have any outages.
Cool. So remember, abundancepod.com is where you can find links to our Substacks. Go and subscribe to our individual newsletters, read our stuff, and also check out the back catalogue of the podcast. We'll put links to other things on there, abundancepod.com. But for now, I guess goodbye for now.
See you next week. Now let's blast through this segment in 25 minutes so I can go and get some lunch, because even on the Manjaro, I am fucking starving at this point.
I'm going to put that at the end of the show.